I pulled up to the gated country club after an 8-hour drive, my heart full of joy for my daughter's baby shower. But instead of a welcome sign, I saw my own face. My portrait was clipped to the security post like a wanted notice, with the words, "Do not let her in. She is dangerous." My own son-in-law, Jason, had signed it. Most women would have made a scene. I chose a different path. I went home, called my attorney, and put their house, the home I paid for in full, with my late husband's savings, on the market. 1 week later, Jason was standing on that lawn, staring at a for sale sign while his bank cards were declined at the grocery store. He thought he could lock me out of the party, but I was the one who held the keys to his entire life. Before I tell you about the moment the truth finally came out in the hospital room, please take a moment to comment and let me know which state you are watching from. It helps me feel connected to you. 8 hours. That is how long I sat in my old Buick, watching the white lines on the asphalt blur into a single, endless ribbon. I am 65 years old and my back was screaming at me by the time I hit the outskirts of the city, but I did not care. Not one bit. I was going to see my daughter, Sarah. I was going to celebrate my very first grandchild. Beside me on the passenger seat was a gift bag with tiny blue ribbons and white tissue paper tucked neatly at the top. Inside was a hand-knit blanket I had spent 3 months working on. Every stitch was a prayer for that baby. I had even stopped at a rest area, 2 exits back just to fix my blouse and make sure my pearls were straight in the mirror. I wanted to look like the proud grandmother I was, not a tired widow who had driven halfway across the country. I wanted to walk into that room and see the look on Sarah's face when she realized her mother had made it after all. I finally saw the sign for the Oak Creek Country Club. It was beautiful. Manicured lawns, tall oak trees, the kind of place that smells like fresh-cut grass and quiet privilege. I felt a swell of pride in my chest. Arthur and I had worked so hard to give Sarah the life she had now. We had helped them with the down payment for their house nearby. We had supported them through every one of Jason's job transitions. I felt like I belonged there. I felt like I was coming home to my family. But then, I reached the gate. A young man in a crisp black uniform stepped out of the small security booth. I rolled down my window, ready to give my name with a warm smile. I was ready to tell him I was the guest of honor's mother, but he did not ask for my name. He looked at me. Then he looked at a piece of paper clipped to the side of his booth. Then he looked back at me. His face went pale, and he suddenly found it very hard to look me in the eye. I followed his gaze to the paper. My heart stopped. There it was. My own face. It was a picture Sarah had taken of me last Christmas while we were decorating the tree, but it had been printed on cheap, grainy paper. And underneath it, in bold black letters that seemed to scream at me, were the words, "Do not let her in. She is dangerous. Dangerous. Me, Martha Sterling, the woman who still bakes cookies for the church bake sale. The woman who had spent her entire life trying to be a soft place for her daughter to land." Beneath those cruel words were 2 signatures I recognized all too well. Jason. And beneath his name was the handwriting of my own daughter, Sarah. The shame was a physical thing. It was a hot, heavy weight that rose my neck and made my ears ring. The young guard shifted his weight and looked down at his shoes. He looked at my lung ho flower basket in the back seat. He looked at the gift bag. He whispered, "I am so sorry, ma'am. I truly am. But I have my orders. I was told to call the police. If you tried to enter the grounds." I could have screamed. I could have called Sarah right then and there and demanded an explanation. I could have made a scene that they would talk about for years. But something in me went very, very cold. I looked past the guard, toward the clubhouse. I saw the blue and white balloons dancing in the breeze near the entrance. I heard a faint, distant burst of laughter and the clinking of glasses. My family was in there, and I was out here. I was being treated like a criminal at my own grandchild's celebration. I did not say a word. I did not give that young man the satisfaction of seeing me break. I simply put the car in reverse, turned the wheel, and drove away. I made it about 20 miles before the world turned into a blur. I had to pull over onto the shoulder of the highway because I could no longer see through the tears. The trucks roared past me, shaking my little car with every gust of wind, but I could not move. I sat there with my hands gripped so tight on the steering wheel that my fingers started to go numb. Dangerous. That was the word Jason chose. He did not just want me gone. He wanted me feared. He wanted to rewrite my entire life story in a single sentence. As I sat there, watching the sun begin to set over the horizon, I realized that the woman who had driven down here was gone. Someone else was driving back. Someone who knew that sometimes the only way to save your family is to stop protecting the people who are trying to destroy it. The driveway was dark when I finally pulled in. The porch light, the one I usually leave on for comfort, had burned out while I was away. It felt like an omen. I sat in the car for a long time, the engine ticking as it cooled down, listening to the silence of my neighborhood. For 8 hours, I had been surrounded by the roar of the highway, but now, the quiet was so heavy, it felt like it was pressing against my chest. I walked into the house, but I did not turn on the big overhead light. I couldn't. I didn't want to see the emptiness of the hallway or the dusty photos on the mantel. Instead, I walked straight to the living room and switched on the small amber lamp that sat on the side table. The light fell softly across the room, landing right on Arthur's chair. It was a large leather wingback chair. The brown leather was cracked in places, worn thin at the armrests where Arthur's hands had rested every evening for 40 years. It was a chair that had seen it all. It had seen him come home tired from the plant, his boots covered in metal dust. It had seen him hold Sarah when she was a baby, rocking her to sleep while the late-night news played on the television. It was the chair where he sat when he told me his breath was getting shorter, and the chair where he spent his final days, wrapped in a wool blanket, watching the birds at the feeder outside. I sat down in my own chair, the one right across from his. I kicked off my shoes and felt the cold floor against my feet. "Arthur," I whispered. My voice sounded thin and brittle in the empty room. "Arthur, I am home." I waited, as I always did, for the ghost of an answer, for the sound of him clearing his throat, or the crinkle of his newspaper. But there was nothing, just the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the ticking of the clock on the wall. "I went to the party," I said, my voice getting a little stronger. "I drove all the way there. I had the blanket I made, the one with the blue trim. You would have liked it, Arthur. It was soft, just like the ones your mother used to knit." I felt the tears starting again, but I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall. "They didn't let me in, Arthur. They put my picture on a post, like I was a criminal, like I was someone to be hunted." I looked at the empty chair, imagining him sitting there. I could almost see his brow furrowing, the way it did when he heard something that offended his sense of justice. Arthur was a man of few words, but he believed in respect. He believed that a man's word was his bond and that family was the foundation of everything. We had worked so hard, Arthur and I. We didn't take vacations to Europe. We didn't buy new cars every 3 years. We saved. We put every extra dollar into the mortgage. We made sure the 401k was full. We built a life that was supposed to be a fortress for our daughter. We did everything for her, I told the chair. "Remember when Jason lost that job at the logistics firm? You were the one who told me we had to help. You said, 'Martha, a young couple needs a head start.' So we bought that house for them. We put it in my name to keep it safe. We thought we were building them a future. We thought we were being good parents." I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees. "But Jason, he's been busy, Arthur. While I was grieving you, while I was sitting here in this house alone, he was busy with papers. He was busy telling Sarah that her mother was becoming difficult. He was busy making me look like a stranger to my own child." The word dangerous flashed in my mind again. Dangerous. I looked at Arthur's chair, and I felt a sudden, sharp pang of guilt. I felt like I had failed him. I had spent my life protecting our legacy, but I had let a fox into the hen house. I had allowed Jason to sit at our table and smile at our faces while he was counting the silver. I had been so focused on being a good mother that I had forgotten to be a wise one. "He's using my money, Arthur," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "He paid for that fancy party at the country club, with the money I gave Sarah for the baby. My money. Your hard work. He used our sweat and our years of sacrifice to hire a guard to keep me away from our grandson." The silence in the room changed then. It didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt cold. It felt like the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Pain is a strange thing. When it first hits you, it's like a wave. It knocks you down and steals your breath. But if you sit in it long enough, if you let the silence really settle in, the pain starts to clear away the clutter. It shows you exactly what is standing in front of you. I realized then that I had been waiting for Sarah to save me. I had been waiting for her to realize that Jason was wrong. I had been waiting for her to be the daughter I raised. But Sarah was inside that country club, laughing and eating cake, while her mother was on the side of the road crying. She had chosen to believe the lie because the lie was easier than the truth. I looked back at Arthur's chair. I remembered the day he died. He had looked at me and held my hand with the little strength he had left. He didn't say he loved me. He didn't have to. He just said, "Take care of the house, Martha. Take care of our girl." I had taken care of the house. But I hadn't been taking care of Sarah. I had been enabling her to be a victim, and I had been letting Jason destroy everything Arthur had spent 40 years building. "I am not going to let him do it, Arthur," I said. My voice was no longer thin. It was steady. It was the voice of a woman who had just found her footing. "I am not going to sit here and fade away while he plays house with our life's work. He thinks I am an old woman who can be pushed into a corner. He thinks I am weak because I am kind." I stood up. My knees popped and my back ached. But I felt a strength in my bones that I hadn't felt since the day we buried Arthur. I walked over to his chair and placed my hand on the worn leather of the armrest. It was cold, but it felt familiar. "He called me dangerous," I whispered. Well, maybe he was right, but not for the reasons he thinks. I realized that night that grief does not have to be a prison. It can be a forge. You can take all that hurt, all that betrayal, and all that silence, and you can turn it into something sharp, something that can cut through the lies. I walked to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. I sat at the table and began to make a list. Not a grocery list, not a list of chores. I began to list every dollar I had ever given them, every bill I had paid, every document Jason had ever asked me to sign. I wasn't Martha the grieving widow anymore. I was Martha, the owner. I was Martha, the protector. The silence in the house was still there. It was still a big, empty room. But as I sat there in the light of the kitchen lamp, the silence didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a clean slate. I knew what I had to do. I knew that the drive back was just the beginning. I looked one last time toward the living room, at Arthur's empty chair. "Sleep well, Arthur," I said quietly. "I'm taking care of the house now." Morning light crawled across my kitchen table, pale and indifferent. I had not slept more than 2 hours. My eyes felt like someone had rubbed sand into them. But my mind was humming with a strange electric energy. I sat there with a cup of black coffee that had long since gone cold, staring at the small stack of papers I had pulled from the side table drawer the night before. When you are a mother, you want to believe in the best version of your children. You want to believe that the man your daughter chose is good, a provider, a person of integrity. For 3 years, I had listened to Jason talk about his bad luck. I had listened to him explain why the rent was late again, or why the car needed a repair they couldn't afford. Each time I stepped in, I told myself I was being a good mother. I told myself I was building a bridge for them to cross until they reached stable ground. But as I sat in the morning quiet, I realized that some people do not want a bridge. They want a free ride, and they do not care who they have to trample to get it. I opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keys for a second. I felt a pang of guilt, as if I was spying on them. But then I remembered the gate. I remembered the picture of my face clipped to that booth. The guilt vanished, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I logged into my secondary savings account. This was an account Arthur and I had set up years ago for emergencies. When Sarah and Jason got married, I added both of them as authorized users. At the time, it felt like a gesture of trust. I told them it was for the big things. A hospital visit. A roof leak. A rainy day. I had not checked the detailed statements in months. I had only glanced at the balance, noticing it was dropping, but assuming Sarah was using it for the baby's nursery or doctor visits. I began to scroll through the transactions. At first, it was small things. $60 at a steakhouse. $100 at an electronics store. Things that did not look like emergencies. My heart began to beat a little faster. I went back further. 6 months. A year. The numbers started to tell a story. A story of a man who was living a life he had not earned. Every time Jason told me they were struggling, he was actually spending. There were withdrawals for golf memberships. There were payments for high-end clothing stores. While I was skipping my own small luxuries to make sure they had enough for their utility bills, Jason was treating my retirement fund like a personal slush fund. Then, I found the one that made my breath catch in my throat. It was a payment made just 2 weeks ago. The amount was written in plain black text on the screen. $4,800. The recipient was the Oak Creek Country Club. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the air leave my lungs. $4,800. That was the cost of the baby shower. The decorations. The catering. The fancy invitations. The blue and white balloons I had seen from the gate. Jason had not paid for that party with his own hard work. He had not saved up to give his wife a beautiful day. He had taken $4,800 out of my account, my hard-earned savings, to pay for a party. And then, he used a tiny portion of that same money to hire a security guard to make sure I could not walk through the door. He had used my own money to buy the lock that kept me out. I sat there, staring at that number. 4,800. It felt like a physical weight on my shoulders. I thought about the drive. The 8 hours of hope. The hand-knit blanket. I thought about the guard's face when he said he had orders to call the police. Jason had planned it all. He knew I would try to come. He knew I would want to be there for my daughter, and he had used my money to ensure my humiliation. I felt a sob rise in my chest, but I pushed it down. I was done with crying. Crying was for when you were hurt. This was different. This was clarity. I began to dig deeper. I looked at the property tax records for the house they were living in. I was the owner, but the bills were sent to their address. I found a record of a residency inquiry filed with the county clerk. Jason had been asking questions about how to establish long-term occupancy rights. He was trying to find a way to make it legally difficult for me to ever ask them to leave. He wasn't just a thief. He was a squatter with a plan. I picked up my phone and called the bank. My voice was steady. I asked to speak with the fraud department. I explained that I needed to remove an authorized user from my accounts immediately. The woman on the phone was polite. She asked if I wanted to report unauthorized transactions. I looked at the screen. At $4,800. Not yet, I said. For now, just revoke his access. I want every card in his name cancelled. Today, of course, Mrs. Sterling, she said. It will be done within the hour. I hung up the phone. I felt a small, sharp spark of satisfaction. It was the first time I had felt in control since I saw that poster at the gate. But I wasn't finished. I realized that Jason had been narrating my life to Sarah. He had been telling her that I was forgetful, controlling, or unstable. He had been building a case against me so that when he finally tried to take everything, Sarah would believe it was for my own good. He thought he was playing a game of chess with a woman who didn't know the rules. But what Jason forgot was that I had been married to Arthur Sterling for 40 years. Arthur didn't just teach me how to save $1. He taught me how to read people. He taught me that when someone shows you who they are, You believed them the first time. I looked at the receipts again. I thought about the word Jason had used on the sign. Dangerous. He wanted me to be the villain. He wanted the world to think I was a bitter, aging woman who was trying to ruin her daughter's happiness. He was using my kindness as a weapon against me. Well, Jason, I whispered to the empty kitchen, you want to see dangerous. I will show you what happens when you threaten a mother's legacy. I realized then that the numbers were not just evidence of a crime. They were my permission slip. They were the proof I needed to stop being nice and start being just. I was not going to be the victim in this story. I was the one who had built the house. I was the one who had filled the accounts. And I was the one who was going to decide when the party was over. I closed the laptop and stood up. I felt a strange sense of peace. The betrayal was deep, yes. The pain was still there, lurking in the corners of my heart. But the uncertainty was gone. I knew exactly who Jason was. And more importantly, I knew exactly what I had to do. Numbers do not lie. People do. And Jason's time for lying was running out. The office of Eleanor Sterling sat on the second floor of a beautiful old brick building in the heart of downtown. It smelled of coffee, expensive mahogany, and the kind of quiet authority that only comes from 40 years of practicing law. Eleanor had been our family lawyer since Arthur and I first bought our grocery store 30 years ago. She was not just a professional. She was a friend. She was the one who helped me settle Arthur's estate, and she was the one who had seen me at my lowest point. When I walked into her office that morning, Eleanor did not offer me a smile. She offered me a seat and a very strong cup of tea. She had a folder open on her desk. It was not a thick folder, but the look on her face told me that every page inside it carried a heavy weight. "Martha," she began, her voice low and steady, "I have spent the last few hours going over the documents you sent me, and I have also done some digging into the recent filings at the county clerk's office." I took a sip of my tea, feeling the warmth spread through my chest, though it did not reach the cold knot in my stomach. "Tell me everything, Eleanor. Do not leave out a single word." Eleanor sighed and leaned back in her leather chair. "Jason is not just spending your money, Martha. That is a crime of greed. What he is doing here, this is a crime of calculation. It is what we call positioning." She slid a document across the desk toward me. It was a residency declaration. I recognized Sarah's signature at the bottom. It was her handwriting, bubbly and round. The same handwriting I used to see on her homework assignments and her birthday cards. Jason had Sarah sign these over the last 6 months. Eleanor explained. He told her they were for insurance. He told her they were for the baby's protection. But in reality, these papers establish a legal trail. They suggest that they have been paying for all the upkeep, all the taxes, and all the utilities for that house. They are designed to make it look like you are a landlord who has walked away from her responsibilities. I felt a chill run down my spine. "But I pay the taxes, Eleanor. I pay for the repairs." "On paper, yes," Eleanor said. "But look at the bank transfers. Jason has been moving money from that secondary account you gave them into a private account in his name. Then, he uses that private account to pay the utility bills and the contractors. He is making it look like the money is coming from his hard work, not your generosity." I looked down at Sarah's signature. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by a cold hand. "She doesn't know, Eleanor. She wouldn't do this to me." Eleanor looked at me with an expression of deep pity. "I know she wouldn't, Martha. And that leads me to the most difficult part of this situation. Jason is not just manipulating the law. He is manipulating your daughter's mind." She paused, as if choosing her next words very carefully. I spoke with a contact at the county health department. Apparently, Jason made an inquiry about adult guardianship and mental competency. He has been telling people, including your daughter, that your grief over Arthur has taken a dark turn. He is planting seeds, Martha. He is telling Sarah that you are becoming confused, that you are becoming controlling, that you are losing your grip on reality. I felt the blood drain from my face. I thought about the poster at the gate. Do not let her in. She is dangerous. Suddenly, that word made a terrible kind of sense. Jason wasn't just calling me a threat to the party. He was calling me a threat to the family. He was building a narrative where I was a sick woman who needed to be managed. He was telling my daughter that every time I helped them, every time I checked in on them, it was a sign of my obsession and my unstable mind. He is gaslighting her, Martha, Eleanor said, using a word that felt too modern and sharp for our quiet friendship. He is making her doubt her own mother, so that she will rely only on him. He is isolating her. And the house? That house is worth $400,000 in today's market. If he can prove that you are mentally unfit and that he has been the primary caretaker of the property, he can try to seize control of your entire estate. I sat in silence. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner of Eleanor's office felt like a hammer hitting a nail. $400,000. Arthur and I had saved for 40 years to pay for that house. It was supposed to be Sarah's inheritance, her safety net. And now, a man who had never held a steady job for more than 6 months was trying to turn it into his personal trophy. He thinks I am an easy target, I whispered. He thinks, because I am 65 and I am alone, that I am weak. Eleanor leaned forward and reached across the desk, placing her hand on mine. Her grip was firm. He made a classic mistake, Martha. He forgot who he was dealing with. He forgot that you are the woman who stood by Arthur Sterling while he built a business from nothing. He forgot that kindness is not the same thing as blindness. I looked at Eleanor, and for the first time in days, the fog of hurt began to lift. In its place was a sharp, diamond-bright clarity. Jason wanted to play a game. Fine. We would play, but we would play by my rules. What do we do first? I asked. Eleanor smiled, and it was the smile of a predator. First, we stop the bleeding. We revoke his access to every single account. Then, we send a formal notice. Not a phone call, not a text, a legal certified notice of intent to sell the property. We do not engage with him. We do not argue with him. We let the law speak for us. I nodded. It felt right. It felt like I was finally putting on my armor. And Sarah? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Sarah will be the hardest part, Eleanor admitted. She has been under his influence for a long time. You cannot force her to see the truth. You have to show it to her. You have to be the mother she remembers, not the person Jason says you are. You stay calm, you stay steady, and you let Jason's own anger do the work for us. When his money runs out, the mask will slip. It always does. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. I felt older than I had when I walked in, but I also felt stronger. I realized that my love for Sarah meant I had to be her mother, even if it meant she hated me for a little while. I had to tear down the house Jason had built of lies, even if it meant she felt the cold for a few days. As I walked out of Eleanor's office and into the bright morning sun, I looked at the people walking by on the sidewalk. They were going to work. They were buying coffee. They were living their lives. They had no idea that a war was starting. Jason had called me dangerous. As I got into my Buick and gripped the steering wheel, I whispered to the empty car. You were right about one thing, Jason. I am dangerous. I am a mother, protecting her child, and there is nothing more dangerous in this world than that. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the knock finally came. 3 even, measured raps on my front door. It was the kind of knock that sounded confident, almost like it belonged to someone who already owned the place. I had just finished folding a load of towels, and I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the silence that followed. I knew who it was. I could feel it in my bones. I smoothed my apron and opened the door. There stood Jason. He was wearing a pale blue button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up neatly at his wrists. He looked exactly like the man I had once trusted. He had that rehearsed, easy smile on his face, the one that usually made people want to do him favors. Beside him was my daughter, Sarah. She was wearing a loose cream dress, and her face was fuller now with the baby. But as I looked at her, really looked at her, I saw shadows around her eyes that had not been there 3 weeks ago. "Martha," Jason said, his voice as smooth as polished stone. "We were just in the area and thought we would stop by to check on you. We have been so worried." He stepped inside before I even invited him. It was a subtle move, a polite intrusion. He led Sarah into the living room, as if he were the host and I were the guest. He sat her down on the sofa and placed his hand firmly on the small of her back. It looked like a gesture of affection. But from where I stood, it looked like he was tethering her. "I will fix some coffee," I said. My voice was calm, steady. I did not let the fire in my chest reach my tongue. I went into the kitchen and moved with deliberate slowness. I needed the time to breathe. I could hear them in the other room. Jason was whispering something to her, his voice low and rhythmic. It was a hum of control. When I returned with the tray, Jason immediately stood up to help me. "You shouldn't be lifting heavy things, Martha," he said with a little laugh. "We know how much you have been through lately, the grief, the stress. It can make a person forget to take care of themselves." He was laying the groundwork, right there in my own living room. He was telling me to my face that I was failing. I sat down in my chair, across from them. I did not take a sip of my coffee. I just watched. I watched how Sarah started to reach for a cookie, but Jason subtly moved the plate an inch out of her reach. I watched how she began to say something about the baby's nursery, but Jason interrupted her before she could finish a single sentence. "Sarah has been overdoing it," Jason said, looking at me with fake concern. "I keep telling her she needs to rest. Her memory has been a little foggy lately. Must be the pregnancy brain, right? We even had a little issue with the bank cards yesterday. A total glitch. I told Sarah it was probably just an administrative error because of the estate transition." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. He was trying to catch my eye, trying to find a crack in my armor. "I figured you might know something about that, Martha," he said, "since you are still the primary on that account. It's a bit embarrassing to have a card declined at the grocery store when you were trying to buy prenatal vitamins for your daughter." I felt the sting of his words. He was using my daughter's health as a shield for his own greed. He wanted me to feel guilty. He wanted me to apologize and hand him the keys to the kingdom again. I looked at Sarah. "Is that right, honey? Are you feeling foggy?" Sarah looked at Jason, then back at me. Her mouth opened, then closed. I guess I have been tired, Mama. Jason says I have been forgetting things." My heart broke right then and there. I realized that Jason had been rewriting her reality every single day. He had been telling her she was confused until she started to believe it. He was building a wall of care around her that was actually a prison. "Well," I said, my voice as cool as a winter morning, "the bank cards are not a glitch, Jason. I removed you as an authorized user, and I closed the secondary account." The silence that followed was heavy. I could see the muscles in Jason's jaw tighten. The nice guy mask slipped for just a fraction of a second, revealing the cold, calculating man underneath. But then, he laughed, a soft, pitying sound. "Martha, Martha, Martha," he said, shaking his head. "This is exactly what I was telling Sarah. You are acting out. It's the stress. You aren't thinking clearly. To cut off your daughter's support right before she gives birth. People will think you have lost your way." "I haven't cut off Sarah," I replied. "I have cut you off. There is a difference." Jason's hand moved. He didn't grab her. He just placed his hand on Sarah's elbow and squeezed. It was a light pressure, but I saw Sarah flinch ever so slightly. She didn't say a word. She just sat there, looking at the floor, while her husband negotiated her life as if she weren't even in the room. "We should go," Jason said, his voice now tight and clipped. "Sarah needs her rest. And clearly, Martha, you need some time to settle your nerves." He stood up and pulled Sarah up with him. He didn't let go of her arm. He steered her toward the door. walking half a step ahead of her, leading her like a prize horse. At the door, he turned back to me. "We will talk soon," he said. It wasn't a promise. It was a threat. I stood on my porch and watched them walk to their car. I saw Jason open the door for her, but he didn't look at her. He was looking at his phone. He was already calculating his next move. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, her head leaning against the window, looking back at the house. For a split second, our eyes met. I saw the fear in them. Not fear of me. Fear that the world she lived in was not what she thought it was. I went back inside and locked the door. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. I was shaking with a righteous anger that felt like fire in my veins. I realized then that Jason was not just after the money. He was after the soul of my family. He wanted to own Sarah, so that he could own everything Arthur and I had built. He was a wolf, and he had been sitting at my table in a Sunday shirt for years. I walked into the kitchen and poured the cold coffee down the sink. I looked at the empty tray. "You think you are smart, Jason," I whispered to the quiet room. "You think you can play with a mother's heart. But you forgot one thing. I know my daughter's face, and I know when she is being held captive." I picked up the phone. I didn't call the bank. I didn't call the lawyer. I called the realtor. "Sharon," I said when she answered. "This is Martha Sterling. I want you to come over. We need to talk about listing the property on Elm Street. Yes, the one where my daughter is living. I want it on the market by Friday." I hung up the phone and sat down at the table. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, dark shadows across the floor. I was 65 years old, and I was about to start a war. But as I looked at the empty chair across from me, I felt Arthur's presence. I felt his strength. The wolf was at the door, but the shepherd was still awake. I waited for 2 days after Jason and Sarah left my house. I needed the air to settle. I needed Jason to feel like he had won, as he had successfully managed me into a corner. A man like Jason is most dangerous when he feels threatened, but he is most careless when he feels superior. I knew his routine. I knew that on Thursday afternoons, he usually went to the driving range to hit golf balls, leaving Sarah alone in that house on Elm Street. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had spent 40 years of my life. I stared at my phone for a long time. My heart was beating in my throat, a heavy, thumping rhythm. I was not calling to argue. I was not calling to plead. I was calling to hand my daughter the truth and let her decide what to do with it. I pressed the call button. It rang 4 times. 5 times. I almost hung up, thinking Jason might have taken her phone away. But then, there was a soft click. "Hello?" Sarah's voice was cautious. It was small and fragile, like she was afraid of who might be on the other end. "Hey, baby," I said. I kept my voice low and warm. I wanted her to hear the mother she used to know, not the unstable woman Jason had described to her. There was a long silence. I could hear her breathing on the other end. "Mama?" Jason said. "He said you were going through a hard time. He said I should give you space so you could find your footing again." I closed my eyes. It hurt to hear his words coming out of her mouth. It hurt to know how deeply he had planted those seeds of doubt. "Sarah," I said gently, "I am not going through a hard time. I am going through a moment of clarity. And I need you to listen to me. Really listen. For just 5 minutes." "I don't know, Mama," she whispered. "Jason says that when you get like this, it's better if I don't engage. He says it only makes your confusion worse." Confusion. That was the word he was using. It was a clever choice. It made my love look like a symptom of a disease. "I am going to tell you one thing, Sarah. Just one thing that you can check for yourself. Do you remember the day of your baby shower? 2 weeks ago?" "Of course," she said. "I waited for you all day. Jason said you called him that morning. He said you were crying and that the drive was too much for you. He said you were too overwhelmed to leave the house." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Sarah. I never called Jason that morning. I was in my car at 6 in the morning. I drove for 8 hours. 8 hours. Across 3 states. I was at the gate of the country club at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. What? No. You weren't there. Jason was with me the whole time. He would have told me. He didn't tell you because he was the one who put my picture on the security gate, I said. My voice was steady, like a heartbeat. He pasted my photo on a wanted poster. He signed his name to it. He told the guard to call the police if I tried to walk through the door. I sat in that driveway for 20 minutes, staring at my own face on a keep out sign. Mama, that can't be true, Sarah stammered. Her voice was beginning to tremble. Why would he do that? He loves me. He wants us to be a family. He wants to be a family where he is the only one you trust, I replied. Sarah, check your phone. Check your blocked messages. Check the trash folder in your texts. I sent you a photo of the gate while I was sitting there. I sent you 10 messages that day. Did you ever see them? I heard movement on the other end. The sound of a phone being shifted. I waited. The silence lasted for what felt like an hour, but it was probably only a minute. Then, I heard a sob. It was a ragged, broken sound that tore through me. Oh my God, she whispered. Mama, there are dozens of messages. Not just from that day. From last month. From the day of my doctor's appointment. They are all here. In the blocked folder. I didn't do this. I swear. I didn't do this. I know you didn't, baby, I said. I felt the tears stinging my own eyes now. Jason did it. He's been pruning your life like a hedge. He's been cutting off anyone who might tell you the truth about the money. Or the house. Or him. The money? She asked. Her voice was hollow now. The $4,800 for the shower, Sarah. It didn't come from his savings. It came from the emergency fund Arthur and I set up for you. He spent your inheritance to throw a party that I wasn't allowed to attend. I heard her breathing get faster. She was hyperventilating. He told me he had been working extra shifts. He told me he was doing it all for us. He said you were the one being greedy with the rent. He said you were trying to take the house away from the baby. The house is being sold, Sarah, I said firmly. But not because I am greedy. It is being sold because I cannot let Jason use it as a base to destroy you. Sharon is listing it tomorrow. I want you to come home. To my house. To your room. He's coming back, Sarah whispered suddenly. I hear his car in the driveway. Mama, I have to go. I don't know what to do. You know exactly what to do, I said. You look at those messages. You look at the bank statements. And you remember who has been there for you for 25 years. And who has been there for 3. I love you, Sarah. Come home. The line went dead. I set the phone down on the table. My hands were shaking so hard I had to sit on them. I had done it. I had cracked the wall. But I knew that once a man like Jason finds a crack in his wall, he will try to tear the whole house down to cover it up. I looked at the clock. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I stood up and walked to the window. The sky was turning a bruised purple, the color of a coming storm. I was 65 years old, and I had spent my life building things. I had built a marriage, a business, a home. Now, I was the one doing the tearing down. I felt Arthur's presence in the room again. It wasn't a ghost. It was a memory of his strength. I could almost hear him saying, Steady, Martha. Keep your eyes on the road. The truth is a funny thing. Once it starts to leak out, you can't mop it up. Jason thought he could control the narrative by deleting messages, and Dan, pasting photos on a gate. He thought he could win by making me look like a villain. But he forgot that a mother's voice is the first sound a child ever hears. And no matter how many lies you tell, That child will always recognize the sound of the truth. I went to the front door and turned the deadbolt. I checked the windows. Then, I sat down in my chair and waited. I knew the phone would ring again. I knew the storm was coming. But for the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. Thursday morning arrived with a crisp, cold wind that rattled the windows of my kitchen. I stood at the counter, holding a mug of tea in both hands, watching the clock. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, Sharon Ellis, my realtor, pulled her white SUV up to the curb of the house on Elm Street. I was not there in person, but in my mind. I saw every single detail. I saw her reach into the back of her car. I saw her pull out the heavy metal stake and the white wooden sign. And then I saw it. The words in bright red. For sale. She hammered that stake into the manicured green lawn. The same lawn I had paid a landscaping company to maintain for 3 years. It stood there like a flag of truth in a land of lies. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. For months, Jason had treated that house like a trophy he had won. He had walked through those rooms as if the $400,000 property was his by birthright. He had used my kindness to build a fortress of comfort, and then he had used that fortress to keep me out. But Jason had forgotten one very important detail. A fortress is only as strong as its foundation, and the foundation of that house was my name, Martha Sterling, and 40 years of Arthur's hard work. I did not have to wait long for the reaction. At 9:30, my phone began to vibrate on the table. It danced across the wood, buzzing with a frantic, desperate energy. Jason's name flashed on the screen. I did not answer. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it happened again. Then a third time. Then came the text messages. They started confused. Martha, there is a mistake. There is a sign in the yard. Call me. Then they became demanding. Pick up the phone. You cannot do this to Sarah. And finally, the mask slipped away entirely. The messages became a stream of jagged, ugly fury. I sat there and read every single one of them. I did not feel hurt. I did not feel small. I felt like a judge reading a confession. I picked up the phone and called my banker. Mr. Henderson. I told him to finalize the stop payment orders we had discussed. I felt a strange sense of peace as I spoke the words. I told him to terminate the automatic transfer of $1,200 that went into Sarah's account on the 1st of every month. I told him to cancel the premium cable subscription and the lawn service. $1,200. To some, it might not sound like a fortune, but to a man like Jason, a man who had not earned a single honest paycheck in years, that $1,200 was his oxygen. It was the money that paid for his golf fees, his expensive shirts, and the steak dinners he used to impress people. I was cutting off the air to his fantasy life. At 10 o'clock, a car pulled into my driveway with such force that the gravel sprayed against the garage door. I did not move. I stayed in my chair. I heard the car door slam. I heard heavy, angry footsteps on my porch. And then the pounding began. I walked to the door and opened it. Jason was standing there. His face was flushed a deep, angry red. His hair was messy, and his eyes were wide with a kind of panic that he couldn't quite hide behind his anger. "What are you doing?" he spat out. His voice was no longer smooth. It was a rasping, ugly sound. "You are selling the house? Are you throwing your pregnant daughter onto the street? Have you completely lost your mind?" I looked at him. I did not look at him with anger. I looked at him with the same clinical indifference I would use to look at a bug on a windshield. "I am not throwing Sarah anywhere, Jason," I said. My voice was low, and it had the weight of iron. "Sarah is my daughter. She will always have a home with me. But you have overstayed your welcome." "You can't do this," he yelled. He stepped forward, trying to use his height to intimidate me. just as he had done to Sarah. I have rights. I've lived there for 3 years. I have papers. I let out a soft, cold laugh. I reached over to the small table by the door and picked up the folder Eleanor had prepared for me. Ah, yes. The papers, I said. The residency declarations. The ones you tricked my daughter into signing. The ones where you tried to claim you were the one paying the bills. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a summary of the bank records Eleanor had found. You see, Jason, you made a mistake. You used my money to pay those bills. You transferred funds from my secondary account into your name, then paid the utilities. That is not residency. That is embezzlement of an authorized account. My lawyer has already flagged every single one of those transactions. His face went from red to a sickly, pale grey. And those papers Sarah signed, I continued. Under the law, since you obtained those signatures through deception and financial abuse, they are not worth the ink used to print them. In fact, they are now evidence. Evidence of your intent to defraud a senior citizen. That is a very serious charge in this state, Jason. He stared at me. He looked like a man who had been playing a game of checkers, only to realize he was standing on a minefield. You wouldn't, he whispered. You wouldn't send the father of your grandchild to jail. I am a mother, Jason, I said. I stepped closer to him until he was the one who had to back away. A mother will do anything to protect her child, even if that means protecting her from the man she thought she loved. You are not a father yet. You are a parasite, and I am done feeding you. I told him he had 24 hours to pack his personal belongings. I told him that the locks would be changed the following morning. I told him that if he so much as raised his voice to Sarah, I would have a restraining order served before sunset. He didn't yell anymore. He didn't have any words left. He looked at me, truly looked at me, and he saw that the Martha he thought he could manage was gone. In her place was a woman who was made of the same steel and grit as the man she had buried. He turned around and walked back to his car. He didn't look back. I closed the door and turned the bolt. I walked back to my kitchen and sat down. My heart was racing, but it was a good kind of racing. It was the feeling of a heavy burden finally being lifted. I looked at the clock. It was 11 o'clock. 1 week ago, I was crying on the shoulder of a highway, feeling like my life was over. Today, I was standing in the center of my own power. I had reclaimed my house. I had reclaimed my name. And most importantly, I had cleared a path for my daughter to come home. Jason had called me dangerous. He was right. I was dangerous because I had nothing left to lose and everything to save. I was dangerous because I knew the truth. I picked up the phone and sent a one-word text to Sarah. Ready. The silence in the house felt different now. It didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like a clean, fresh start. The sign was in the yard. The bank was closed. The wolf was running. The party was finally, truly, over. The weeks following the sale of the house were quieter than I expected. Jason did not go out with a bang. He went out with a whimper. Once the bank accounts were frozen, once the $1,200 monthly checks stopped, and once he realized that the legal walls were closing in, he simply vanished. He was a man who only knew how to be a captain when the sea was calm, and the boat was made of someone else's gold. As soon as the storm hit, he jumped overboard. Sarah moved back into her old bedroom, the same room where she used to hang posters of boy bands and dream about the future. For the first few days, she barely spoke. She moved through the house like a ghost, her eyes red from crying in the shower, her hands always resting on her stomach. I did not push her. I did not ask for apologies. I just made sure there was hot tea on the table and a warm fire in the hearth. Grief has a way of introducing you to yourself. Sarah was meeting the woman she had become under Jason's shadow, and she did not like what she saw. But I told her every single day, that the past is just a story we tell ourselves. The only thing that is real is the next breath. Then came the call. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. A cold Tuesday morning. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, and I was awake before the second ring. I knew that sound. It was the sound of a new chapter beginning. I rushed into Sarah's room. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face pale, her breathing coming in short, sharp gasps. She looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw the little girl who used to run to me when she had a nightmare. "Mama," she whispered. "It's time. It is really time." I didn't panic. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the bag we had packed a week ago. I helped her into the car. The drive to the hospital was only 15 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. It was so different from that 8-hour drive to the country club. That drive was fueled by hope and ended in a wanted poster. This drive was fueled by a fierce, protective love. The hospital was quiet. The hallway smelled of salt and lemon, and the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I stayed with her. I did not leave her side for a single second. I held her hand while she screamed. I wiped her forehead with a cold cloth. I whispered every bit of strength I had into her ear. "You can do this, Sarah," I told her. "You are a sterling. You are made of iron and grace. Just breathe with me. Just one more." Hours passed. The world outside the hospital room windows began to turn from black to a soft, hazy grey. The sun was coming up. And then, in the middle of that pale morning light, the room was filled with a new sound. It was a cry. A loud, healthy, beautiful cry that shattered the silence of the last few months. I watched as the nurses placed that tiny, red, wrinkled miracle on Sarah's chest. I saw my daughter's face transform, the shadows of the last 3 years, the doubt, the shame, the fear. It all evaporated in a single heartbeat. She looked at her son, and she became a mother. I stood in the corner of the room, tears streaming down my face, and I felt a presence so strong it took my breath away. Arthur. I felt him standing right there beside me. I could almost hear him laughing, that deep, warm laugh that used to fill our kitchen. "We did it, Arthur," I whispered to the air. "He is safe. They are both safe." A few minutes later, the nurse wrapped the baby in a soft blue blanket and turned to me. "Would the grandmother like to hold him?" she asked with a smile. I reached out my arms. My hands were shaking. When they placed that small, warm weight into my lap, I felt a shift in the universe. I looked down at his tiny face. He had Arthur's chin. He had Sarah's eyes. He was perfect. He was a clean slate. I realized then that I had not just been fighting Jason for a house. I had not been fighting for $4,800 or a $1,200 monthly check. I had been fighting for this moment. I had been fighting to make sure that this little boy would never grow up in a house built on lies. I had been fighting to ensure that he would never know the cold, calculating manipulation of a man like Jason. I had protected the legacy, not the money, not the brick and mortar, but the soul of our family. I looked at Sarah. She was resting back against the pillows, looking exhausted but peaceful. She looked at me and whispered, "Thank you, Mama. Thank you for not giving up on me. Even when I gave up on myself." "I could never give up on you, baby," I replied. "I was just waiting for you at the gate. I just had to wait a little longer than I expected." The days that followed were a blur of diapers, lullabies, and the sweet smell of baby powder. Sarah decided to name him Arthur, little Artie. Every time I say his name, it feels like a prayer being answered. Jason never reached out. He didn't sign the birth certificate. He didn't send a card. And that was his final gift to us. His absence was the most honest thing he had ever given Sarah. We eventually sold the house on Elm Street. We took the money and put it into a trust for Artie's education. I made sure that the papers were airtight. No authorized users, no loopholes. Just a foundation of security for a boy who deserved the world. Sarah is different now. She is stronger. She is more observant. Sometimes I see her looking at me, and I see the respect in her eyes. She knows what I did. She knows that her mother is dangerous only to those who mean her harm. I still sit in my living room every evening. I still turn on the lamp beside Arthur's chair. But I don't feel lonely anymore. I hear the sound of a baby monitor humming on the coffee table. I hear the soft thud of Sarah's footsteps in the kitchen. I drove 8 hours to a party where I was not welcome. I cried on the side of a highway. I felt the sting of a wanted poster at a country club. But as I sit here, rocking my grandson to sleep, I realize that every mile was worth it. The light in the delivery room didn't just show me a baby. It showed me a future. It showed me that truth, no matter how hard it is to tell, always leads you home. The party is over. But the life, the real, honest, beautiful life, has just begun. I am sitting on my front porch this evening, watching the sun dip below the trees. The sky is a beautiful, soft orange, the color of a peach. Inside the house, I can hear the quiet hum of the baby monitor. Little Artie is sleeping, and Sarah is finally resting. For the first time in a very long time, my heart feels light. It feels steady. I think back to that 8-hour drive. I think about the woman who was fixing her pearls in the rearview mirror, so full of hope, and so unaware of the wall that had been built against her. I felt so small at that country club gate. I felt like a stranger in my own life. But as I sit here now, I realize that the gate was not there to stop me. It was there to wake me up. Being a mother is a job that never ends. It just changes shape as the years go by. When our children are small, we protect them from the dark. We hold their hands across the street. But as they grow, sometimes the danger changes. Sometimes the danger is not a scraped knee or a nightmare. Sometimes the danger is a person who speaks in a sweet voice, but carries a cold heart. I learned that motherhood means being brave enough to be the villain in someone else's story, if it means saving your child. Jason called me dangerous. He told the world I was unstable. He used my grief for Arthur as a weapon. But I found out that I am not fragile. I am not a victim. I am the owner of my life and the protector of my family's legacy. To all of you listening, especially those of you who have walked many miles in your own shoes, I want to say this. Do not let anyone tell you that your time has passed. Do not let anyone make you feel invisible in your own home. You have worked 40 years, 50 years, 60 years to build your life. You have a right to defend it. You have a right to be respected. Arthur and I saved every penny. We skipped the fancy vacations so we could build a foundation. And I am so proud that I did not let a man like Jason tear that foundation down. I did not just save a house. I saved my daughter. I saved my grandson. I made sure that the Sterling name still stands for something honest. If you are going through a hard time with your family, or if you feel like you are being pushed into a corner, please, do not give up. Trust your gut, follow the paper trail, and remember that kindness is a gift, but it should never be a doormat. You are allowed to set boundaries. You are allowed to say no. I drove 8 hours to meet my grandson. I saw my picture on a keep out sign. I cried until I couldn't see the road. But I would do it all again. I would drive 1,000 miles through 1,000 storms just to be exactly where I am right now. I am Martha Sterling. I am 65 years old. And I am finally home. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment and let me know. It means so much to hear from you. God bless you, and keep your head held high.